Okay, are you ready? Bunjie and I head to Maryland for the Early Crossbow season for the 6th time. Can you believe that? The 6th year in a row. Season 5 of Death by Bunjie starts right now. I like hunting in the early crossbow season. That's what I call it, the early crossbow season, because I hunt with a crossbow all year long, or at least every season I try to hunt with a crossbow. But I like hunting in the early crossbow season in particular, going to Maryland, doing whatever, because it gives me a chance to try out my gear, make sure I can work out any kinks in that gear, like broadheads or arrows or the strings or accuracy, anything like that. Any potential problems with the crossbow can be worked out, as well as with all the filming equipment. Brand new cameras, changing filming styles, that sort of thing. I started doing this a few years back when my daughter and I went to a local boar preserve to try out a new broadhead. Back then I was using the X-Act broadhead. I was shifting from fixed broadheads to mechanical broadheads. That hunt gave us a great opportunity to try out those new broadheads. This year's no different, except there's just new things to try out, new technologies to use, and new things that I wanted to try out in the stand and see if they were going to work. If you've been following Death by Bunjie, you know that I put a new scope on Bunjie. We also put on some gear to quiet Bunjie down, to make the crossbow a little bit quieter, to see if that would help us maybe harvest more than one deer in a sit down there in Maryland where that's legal. I'm also trying a new broadhead this year. I'd always stuck with and preached here on this channel that you should stick with what your manufacturer recommends. In my case, I use an Excalibur crossbow, so I was using Excalibur broadheads. This year I decided to try something new. We did a whole bunch of tests and learned that the X-Act actually wasn't the most accurate broadhead in the bunch for me. In fact, after a whole bunch of tests, I was really impressed with the Rage hypodermic crossbow broadhead, and that shot very accurate for me. It gives me a nice 2-inch cutting diameter, at least that's what it advertises, and we're going to see on this trip to Maryland whether that's true. This year I'm also trying out the Tacticam. The Tacticam 5.0 is the one that I went with. It's the newest version of that camera. I decided to mount that on the crossbow to give me that camera angle that I always refer to as the BunjieCam. In the past I've always used a GoPro camera for that purpose. Problem with that is I didn't really like the way it stuck up in the air, and the GoPros provide a very good but very wide angle point of view. I'd rather have a point of view that was a little bit more zoomed in, a little bit more telescoped in, if you know what I mean. The Tacticam now, at least the 5.0, has an 8x zoom, and I figured I'd give that a try when I hunt in Maryland. Now, one of the reasons I originally picked Maryland, why did I go down there? Why did I head south from Pennsylvania, here my home in northeastern Pennsylvania, go south to Maryland, to the old line state? Why did I choose to do that originally? One of the reasons was to get a lot more exposure to deer. There have been times, for example, when I was sitting over agricultural fields and saw 56 deer in one sitting, and that was just amazing to me. Here in northeastern Pennsylvania, we do not have deer numbers like that, at least not where I hunt here in northeastern Pennsylvania. So it was great to see big deer numbers, and I was thinking that if I'm going to hunt with a crossbow, if I'm going to do a channel about crossbow hunting, I ought to have some experience. I ought to shoot a whole bunch of deer down there. This trip was a perfect example of that, and there's going to be a series of videos here that I'm filming just right now today that I'll be releasing over the next couple of weeks about this hunting excursion and the success that Bunjie and I had. Now, you might remember the success that Bunjie and I had a couple of years ago when we sat in a particular tree stand. I had the opportunity to sit in that tree stand again this year in my first sit back into Maryland, and I sat in that tree stand. This is a tree stand where I had shot a doe once before. Now, a couple of years ago when I shot that doe, it was very hot. In fact, the heat index was over 100 degrees, if you can believe that. I shot a doe on the opening day down there when I was successful in Maryland that year. The heat index was over 100 degrees. It was ridiculously hot that day. I'll never forget that, sweating in the tree stand like that, and very happy to be successful early in the afternoon so that I could process that deer and get out of there. This year, when I had an opportunity to sit in that same stand, it wasn't quite as hot, but it still was pretty steamy in there, and we didn't have any luck during that sit.
If only hurt yourself or somebody else.
did get a chance to sit in another familiar tree stand, the tree stand that I have referred to as my favorite tree stand in Maryland. It's overlooking a 40-acre agricultural field, the field that I like to call the Milo field. And the reason I call it that is because I shot a deer there my first year in Maryland. I shot a nice 4-point velvet buck there. Great little deer, and I had a great experience during that. That hunt is on this YouTube channel as well. I call it the Milo field because that field at that time was planted 100% in Milo, and it was the first time I had ever seen that crop. I didn't even know what Milo was. I had to go home and look it up. But that sort of crop gives a lot of security for deer, a lot of places for them to hide, gives them a lot of opportunity to be out there and conceal themselves, but it also attracts them because it is food, and it was a great way to see a lot of deer. The problem with it was the deer would hide in that Milo. You didn't get a chance to get shooting opportunities quite as much, although I was successful by the end of that hunt. Unfortunately, this year, no Milo, no crops in this field. The field was barren. It had grown up with native grasses and that sort of thing. And the reason for that was they could not get in there to plant that field because it was simply too wet. The weather did not cooperate for the farmers this year in Maryland, at least not in that particular location. It was a very difficult year for farmers because of all the rain that they got. Now, in Maryland, you can hunt over bait. I know that's not for everybody. And as I've said before on this channel, I am actually 100% opposed to hunting over bait. I don't like it one bit. Unless it's legal, in which case I love it and I fully support it. So here in Maryland, it actually is legal to hunt over bait, and that was one of the reasons I chose Maryland to begin with. I kind of like hunting over bait because it positions the deer nicely, gives you an idea where you're going to have your shooting opportunities instead of having them spread all around you. And it also makes filming a lot easier because you know that the deer is going to be sort of in that location if you get a shot, and keeping your gear pointed in that direction is a lot easier to do. Now, the deer are still active in that area. They're still coming into that field. There's a lot of native stuff that they can eat there, but they're also aware that that corn pile is there. It's been there for a little bit of time, so they eventually are going to make their way to that. At least that's what I'm hoping. I saw a fawn with spots enter the field, wander around the field a little bit, and those little fawns can hide right down in those grasses and conceal themselves very nicely. Eventually, I saw a nice doe enter the field as well. She seems to meander all over the field, not have a plan as to where she's going.
Waiting for you to come in. I call out to you when I think you're near, and that's when the fun begins. You're walking around, strutting your stuff, showing off for all the girls. But come on over here and get settled in.
But eventually she turns and starts heading our way.
Not that kind of girl. I'm not that kind of girl. I won't play your games like the other teens, 'cause I'm not that kind of girl. When we first met, I was sitting in the grass, leaning up against a tree. You came into view, right then I knew that you were the one for me.
Now I have to sit there for 15 minutes. I'm in position because as the deer's looking away, when she starts to look in a different direction, I get positioned. I get the cameras turned on. I get the crossbow lifted up, and I get set up to take a shot in the event that I need to do so. This tree stand does not have a shooting rail. I like having those shooting rails on the front of a tree stand where you can rest the crossbow. But I've shot plenty of deer out of this tree stand before. I know that I can make a decent shot off of my knee. I've done it in the past. I practice that way on occasion, and I shoot that way out of blinds all the time during the hunting seasons. So I'm not concerned necessarily about not having that shooting rest. I am concerned about being able to position myself without that deer seeing me. So I'm real careful. I leave the crossbow pointed off in one direction, and eventually I get positioned nicely. Now she's head on. I can't take a shot here. She's looking right at me. At least that is the way she's positioned. I can't take a head-on shot, not gonna do it. But I will take a quartering to shot if she gives me a peek at her broadside. She lifts her head up, she starts to reposition a little bit, starting to feel a little bit more comfortable there at the corn pile. She turns just enough to give me a peek at her broadside. Bunjie and I, we're going to take that shot.
I kill animals and eat their flesh because it's dinner. Wild game is my favorite dish.
The deer runs off, and I'm listening, of course, trying to find out whether or not I can hear that deer crash. And sure enough, I think that I hear that deer crash. I know that she's heading out through that little wooded grove off to my left, out in front of me. That's just fine with me because she's headed toward the car. But then all of a sudden now I get concerned because I look out in the field before I even turn off the camera, another deer running away. That has me concerned because if that's the deer I just shot, she's moving far too well to have been the recipient of a good shot. On the bright side, I know penetration is not an issue because I can see the luminoc right in front of me, just on the other side of the bait pile. I can tell where that arrow ended up, and I can see that it passed through that deer because I watched that arrow go through the scope, so that should give us a blood trail if we need to track that deer any distance. So now it's the moment of truth. Now it's time to find that deer. The evening approaches. I get down from the tree stand. I pack up all of my gear, get it all in the car, walk out to the car, put it away. And then I come back. I look at the arrow. Very happy with that. The arrow has a great amount of blood on it. It looks like it's got some lung blood on there with the bubbles and all that good stuff. So I'm pretty happy going forward here to track this deer. The guy shows up, helps me look for the deer. No problem locating her. We drag her out to the road, and she's ready to be gutted and processed. Now, the blood trail was satisfactory. I can tell you if we had to rely only on the blood trail, we would have found this deer. In fact, she ran about 60 yards, and we tracked her about 40 of that with the blood trail to find out where she had entered that grove of trees. It turned out she was not the deer that was booking across the field. Would have been great information to have when I was sitting in the tree stand. The last 20 yards or so, we were looking through this grove of trees. I was able to see the deer through the grove of trees. So that's how we tracked the deer. But the blood trail certainly was adequate. I don't have any complaints about that. Now, these pictures might be a little bit gruesome. I suggest you not watch the rest of this video if you're squirmish, if you don't like bloody type of pictures. But I know a lot of people are interested about that. A lot of people want to know if these broadheads are going to work. Those pictures show that the broadhead did in fact open completely on impact. There is a 2-inch hole going into that deer. There is a 2-inch hole going out. So the broadhead stayed open and passed through the deer. Did a lot of damage. Don't assume that your broadhead's going to pick up the slack there. Of course, accuracy is number one with crossbow hunting. We want to make sure that we make good shots, take good shots, and make good shots. But in this case, took a shot that was probably ill-advised. We still ended up with the deer, and the broadhead picked up the slack. So I'm very happy with that. And on that note, when I shot my doe, when I took that shot with a crossbow, it was loud enough that that second deer that was in the field ran away. Now, she heard that either the commotion of my deer running off or she heard the commotion of the shot being taken. Either way, it was enough to move her out of that field. She did not come back in the hour or so that I sat in the tree stand after that. Now, does that say that the quieting gear didn't work, that it didn't do its job, that it didn't increase the likelihood of a second shot? I can't say for sure. On a lot of these things, you never really know for sure. But I can tell you that if you stay tuned to Death by Bunjie, if you subscribe, and if you watch future videos coming up here in the next couple of weeks, you will get answers to those questions. You'll get more information. Because this hunt in Maryland in the early crossbow season is not over. Thank you for tuning into this. I hope you've enjoyed this hunting video. Subscribe for future hunting videos. There's more coming for sure. Check out the Facebook page if you're interested in that stuff. And until next time, all hail Bunjie.
The second state is number one.